Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is stepping up efforts to punish Iran, but so far his plan does not involve taking military action. On Wednesday, the president announced he will substantially increase sanctions targeting the country's already desperate economy. Iran is at the center of an international investigation into the origins of airstrikes that heavily damaged the world's largest oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia last weekend. Shortly before Secretary of State Mike Pompeo touched down in Jeddah, Saudi officials presented wreckage from drones that they say proves the attack was, quote, unquestionably sponsored by Iran. Iran is sticking by its story that it wasn't involved, but David Martin has learned the attack was given the green light at the highest level.
A U.S. official tells CBS News the attack was approved by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, but only on condition it be carried out in a way that made it possible to deny Iranian involvement. The attack succeeded, but the plan to deny it is falling apart.
You can see of the debris.
Today, Saudi Arabia displayed wreckage of what it said were Iranian cruise missiles and drones.
You can see the date of the manufacture, which is 2019.
The circuit boards can be reverse engineered to determine the exact route the weapons flew. But U.S. officials say the most damning evidence is still unreleased satellite photos showing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard making preparations for the attack at Avaz airfield. From there, the weapons flew through Kuwaiti airspace some 400 miles to their targets in Saudi Arabia. The satellite photos were of no use in stopping the attack, since their significance was not realized until after the fact. We were caught completely off guard, one U.S. official said.
We will show you some of the footages.
The Saudis showed grainy surveillance video of the incoming Iranian drones, but none of the actual detonations, which one U.S. official described as a tidal wave of flame. Secretary of State Pompeo, who met today with Saudi Arabia's crown prince, called it an act of war. But President Trump says he's in no rush to respond.
You know, there's plenty of time to do some dastardly things. It's very easy to start, and we'll see what happens.
The top U.S. military commander for the Middle East has asked permission to send 3 more batteries of anti-aircraft missiles to help Saudi Arabia protect its oil facilities. General Frank McKenzie has also drawn up plans for retaliatory strikes against Iranian oil facilities and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. When President Trump was briefed on the military options, he insisted Saudi Arabia would have to contribute to any retaliatory strike. He's scheduled to meet with his national security advisors again on Friday, looking for ways to respond to Iran's act of war without starting an all-out war. Elaine?
David Martin, thank you. Margaret Brennan joins me now from the White House. Margaret, President Trump described these new sanctions as substantial. Given the history of sanctions against Iran, is there any indication of what they might entail?
Well, no one in the administration has been able to answer a question about those sanctions, in part because the tweet got ahead of the actual rollout of them. They are not in place. I've talked to a number of officials at the Treasury, at State, around Washington, and no one can describe yet what these sanctions will entail. What we know is that the Trump administration is trying to build its own case publicly. They are looking at the intelligence that, as David Martin has been reporting, is now kind of being pieced together almost forensically to show what happened, who did what, and where. And I would look for some of those officials who are pointed out as literally having pulled the trigger in Iran as potentially being targeted with sanctions. But at this point, the Trump administration has already sanctioned the supreme leader himself, and that economy of that country is really on the brink. They are in dire straits, so there's really not much more left when it comes to tightening that financial noose. And the argument made by allies of ours, the European powers, who point back to the decision to pull out of the nuclear deal in the first place as the trigger that set off this chain of events. They argue that the maximum pressure campaign of sanctions has just led to maximum resistance by the Iranians.
Well, during their presentation of evidence, Saudi officials stressed that this was not just an attack against the kingdom, that it warranted global attention. How is Iran characterizing what happened?
Iran is denying that this happened. As David Martin's been reporting, they always look for plausible deniability when acting through a proxy. What is tremendous in this case is that it was actually fired from Iranian territory by part of the Iranian military. That is a state-on-state attack. You can't blame a terrorist group for that one. And so they, as a government, now potentially face real confrontation if the world does get on the same page. At the United Nations, remember, all the world leaders are set to gather just next week up in New York City. And this is going to become a big focus. It will be a big point of discussion. But this is also why when we talk about the cracks in global alliances, this is when they could really matter. Because if the rest of the world isn't coming to the same conclusion. The UN is sending in inspectors. The French are sending in inspectors. The UK still has not said Iran is responsible. Until we get there, it is hard to see how the global response will be strong enough. And that is what the Trump administration diplomatically is focused on right now, building up that coalition.
Well, there are a couple of theories about why Iran would have carried out these strikes. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the backdrop to this, if you believe that the domino effect here, or the escalatory effect of pulling out of the nuclear deal led us to where we are, the argument is that the Iranians are trying to build leverage in order to get back to the negotiating table, essentially being asked to be rewarded for bad behavior, and that potentially a planned escalation was a miscalculation, that they planned to do something and they didn't plan for it to go this way. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that this was simply to show that Iran is going to continue to defy the world, that as allies argue, maximum pressure led to maximum resistance, that Iran's not going to back down. At the root of this is the fact that the regime ruling Iran has really been defined for over 40 years by resistance. It was a revolutionary group. They really talked about resisting the West. And so the premise of having an enemy is really useful, particularly when you as a government may be failing to be able to feed your own people, and that is economically where that country is right now.
All right, Margaret Brennan for us. Margaret, thank you very much.